He wasn't afraid to dream big dreams, and it never mattered if they were impossible. He was impatient with book learning, yet he held more than 100 patents of his own. When he was awarded the Emperor's Medal for Achievement, he wanted to receive it in his work clothes and shop cap. It could only be one man, our own Mr. Honda. Soichiro Honda was born the son of a blacksmith, and from his earliest days, he dreamed of building machines that others could never imagine.
When Mr. Honda was a child and he saw his first car, he ran after the car, and when the car stopped and oil dripped out of its engine into the dirt, he dipped his two hands into the oil and rubbed it all over his arms. And that oil perhaps never left his senses.
Even as a small boy, Mr. Honda had big dreams, and as he grew older, he became impatient with school.
He liked to do things with his hands, and he felt that he could learn more that way than reading books.
So at the age of 15, he apprenticed at a Tokyo auto repair shop, and a few years later, he opened one of his own. Then, Mr. Honda decided to go racing. He won one race after another. But while setting a Japanese speed record that would stand for years, he crashed. After a year of recuperation, he decided to manufacture piston rings. So he went back to school at the age of 31.
He was a maverick. He operated kind of outside the traditional rules of the Japanese culture.
After the war, Mr. Honda sold his piston ring factory and then made a major decision.
Mr. Honda decided that he wanted to be involved with some form of transportation. So he adapted surplus engines to bicycles and started selling them.
Then, in 1948, Mr. Honda established his biggest dream by founding the Honda Motor Company.
I think a lot of people know that some man named Honda founded this company, and this was one of the giants of the motorcycle business, whose impact may never be equaled.
For the first few months, the small company struggled. Then, in 1949, Takeo Fujisawa joined Honda. His genius for finance matched Mr. Honda's genius for engineering, and the rest was history. In less than 5 years, Honda developed the most advanced motorcycle Japan had ever seen. True to form, Mr. Honda called it the Dream. It was the first of many successes for the Honda Motor Company.
He was a can-do person, and he instilled in his people such a positive attitude, the belief that they could do anything so long as they set their mind to accomplishing their goals.
Soon, Mr. Honda decided to pit his company's motorcycles against the world's best. Even though he had no experience building race bikes, in 1954 he publicly announced his most audacious dream yet: to win the most prestigious race in the world, the Isle of Man Tourist Trophy.
I used to get all the British magazines, and I can recall this Honda saying that he was going to come and win the Isle of Man, which was kind of funny, really, because here's a brand new outfit from Japan that no one had hardly heard of.
Confident, Mr. Honda went to scout the race for the first time.
But when he got there, he saw that the Americans and the Europeans were racing motorcycles that had 3 times the power that his engines could produce.
Stunned by the competition he'd have to face, Mr. Honda set out to achieve what others considered impossible. 6 years later, in 1960, after thousands of tests, his motorcycles placed in the top 10 at the Isle of Man. And in 1961, another of Mr. Honda's dreams came true. Honda motorcycles took first, second, third, fourth, and fifth in both the 250 and 125 class.
And that stunned the world, and it made Honda one of the finest motorcycles in the world.
I remember reading the reports afterward that when they disassembled the motorcycle to inspect it, it appeared to be built exactly like a watch. At that time, 4 valves per cylinder were certainly heard of, but nobody ever used it. But Honda used it.
And Mr. Honda never looked back. his company became the most advanced motorcycle maker in the world and the most successful.
Mr. Honda once said that sometimes that you'll fail 99 times out of 100. But, you know, if you can be successful that one time, that can make up for everything.
He had a vision, he had a heart, and I believe that extension is why we have what we have today.
No one that I've met since had the dynamic personality, the energy, and was as much of a people person as Mr. Honda. And I think what makes Honda different than most other companies is the spirit of Mr. Honda.
For example, there was a very elegant party and many top executives were in attendance, and Mr. Honda took his coat off, put the waiter's coat on.
All of a sudden, here comes Mr. Honda. He's taken the little white towel, put it over his arm. He's pouring champagne in everyone's glass at every table, and there must have been 100 people there. That's the kind of guy he was.
And everybody was just astonished, but he was so different from what other executives were like.
Mr. Honda shunned wearing a coat and tie. He would only do it if he had to. He'd rather put on a shop coat and get down on the factory floor and stand there, put his arm around a worker, help him put an engine together.
Mr. Honda never forgot his roots. And so wherever he went, he was always conscious of the little people that were there.
When Mr. Fujisawa retired in 1973, in typical Honda style, Mr. Honda said, "I will too." But Mr. Honda never really left Honda Motor Company. From time to time, he could still be seen on the factory floor with the title Supreme Advisor. In 1989, he became the first Japanese ever inducted into the Automotive Hall of Fame in Detroit.
There'll never be another man like Mr. Soichiro Honda.
I really do truly believe he's one of the 2 or 3 most important men of the 20th century in terms of manufacturing in this world. The impact that he's had, not just in the home market in Japan, but all around the world.
Mr. Honda told us, people come first, not the technology come first. He is a very great human being, and a single great human being.
Thank you for the dream, Mr. Honda. In the 50s, Americans knew all about motorcycle riders. They were tough, they were greasers, they rode big, loud bikes.
I think the guy was going to have chains hanging around his waist and black leather jacket and tattoos up and down his arms and drinking beer and smashing bottles on his heads or whatever.
Way back in 1959, when Hondas were first introduced here, Americans didn't know what to make of the new bikers on the block.
I was in Japan and saw the little step-throughs, the little 50cc step-throughs. So I got one of the very first ones that came over to America. My friends would go, "You got a motorcycle?" I go, no, it's not a motorcycle, it's a Honda.
When Honda first opened its headquarters on Pico Boulevard, it sold its small motorcycles on consignment from a truck.
When we first started selling Honda, we had the C100. It was ideal because it was something that anybody could ride. It had an automatic transmission.
Tickle the float and turn the choke on and kick it, and it usually started the first time every time. It was just an incredible little motorcycle.
Everywhere you looked, any television show you turned on, any magazine you picked up, every commercial, you would see a Honda in the background. You would see movie stars on Honda. That particular motorcycle, the C100 Super Cub, did more to make motorcycling acceptable than any other vehicle that I can think of.
Later, the Honda Cub would become the world's best-selling motorized vehicle of all time. In 1964, bolstered by the initial success of the Super Cub, Honda engineered one of the most brilliant marketing campaigns in history.
They completely rewrote the landscape for the motorcycle industry in the United States with their marketing programs.
That same year, on the night of the Academy Awards, Honda broadcast the first motorcycle commercial ever to air on television.
There are many ways of covering ground. You can be conventional and use 4 wheels. There's nothing wrong with this. You'll have lots of company. Or you can relive palmier days, like this. Only a good horse is hard to find. On the other hand, you may prefer the simplicity of two wheels. Of course, you put more in than you get out. But by replacing muscle power with horsepower, you can ride a Honda, conserve your energy, and enjoy the fun, freedom, and economy of two wheels. A Honda is easy to ride. Even your brother-in-law can master it in minutes. And as for economy, a Honda never gulps gas, just sips it 200 miles to the gallon. And a Honda costs less to own than a good set of golf clubs. It can hold 45 miles an hour all day without complaining. The engine practically takes care of itself. That's an automatic clutch and 3-speed shift he's using. Foolproof and simple. And as for safety, with Honda's cam-type brakes on both wheels, you stop on a dime. You'll have a lot of fun riding a Honda. Of course, if you must have 4 wheels, how about another Honda?
Now that all of America was meeting the nicest people on Hondas, who was introducing them?
In other words, if you met the nicest people on a Honda, then you would certainly have to meet the nicest people in a Honda dealership.
During the 60s, Honda began building a partnership with dealers, creating the finest sales network the industry has ever known.
I remember teasing my grandfather, because he was a motorcycle dealer in the 20s, that we had more employees than he sold motorcycles in his first year in business.
And once people learned to ride a Honda, that was just the beginning.
They kept introducing new models, so somebody would start off with a small bike, and pretty soon they were up to a medium-sized bike, and eventually they'd wind up with a 750.
And along the way, there was the CT90 Trail 90 and the Z50A Mini Trail, the bikes so many Americans started out with. There was the CL72 Scrambler 250, which Dave Eakins, along with Bill Robertson, rode the length of Baja. The CB77 Superhawk, Honda's first serious street bike. And who could forget the CB450 and 350, whose technology foreshadowed the future. By 1968, on the strength of the Nicest People campaign, Honda had sold more than 1 million motorcycles in America, an accomplishment that perhaps only Honda was bold enough to predict. And if the motorcycle industry and the press were stunned by that accomplishment, nobody was ready for what came next.
I was 18 at the time, and I just couldn't take my eyes off of it. I can envision myself riding it down the road.
Imagine this massive 4-cylinder engine sitting sideways in the frame, protruding boldly from each side.
There were people lined up with deposits on a Phantom motorcycle. We probably had 24 deposits on this CB750, sight unseen.
A 750 4-cylinder at that time was a super bike. I mean, everybody else was running around with a 2-cylinder bike, and for them to leap that far ahead with that kind of technology was just unheard of.
The original 1969 CB750 4-cylinder was a landmark motorcycle because it clearly established the Japanese as serious players in the motorcycle industry.
Daytona, the proving ground. If you can win here, you can take on the world. In 1970, Dick Mann was a 36-year-old racer who'd been riding at Daytona since the middle 1950s, but who never won the 200.
I happened to know that Dick Mann didn't have a ride. So I called Dick and asked him if he would like to ride a Honda at Daytona.
I'd never missed a race since 1955, and that was the first year I wasn't going to race. And Bob called and asked me if I wanted to ride the 750 Honda, and naturally I did.
Dick Mann and the Honda 750 made history that year by winning the Daytona 200. The victory served notice that from that day forward, Honda was going to be the force to be reckoned with on tracks all across America. The story of Honda racing is the story of a company that could never settle for second best, a philosophy that started with its first victories at the Isle of Man in 1961.
Honda's first foray into any kind of serious racing was into the Grand Prix circuit throughout Europe in the 60s, and they won championships in every class.
Honda began to dominate the world of racing. Racers like Mike Halewood, Tom Phillis, Luigi Taveri, Jim Redmond, and Ralph Bryans all rode Hondas to world championships. Back in the 60s, Honda had raced a 500cc Grand Prix bike, but had never won a title. Now, in the 80s, that was about to change. Freddie Spencer was a young rider who'd been racing in the States. Then, in 1982, Honda offered him a ride in Europe on their new machine, a 500cc two-stroke Grand Prix bike. Spencer came in third, but the very next year, he came in first in a fabled battle against the great Kenny Roberts that came down to the last race. Riding the NS 500 Triple, Spencer gave Honda the final jewel in their racing crown, the 500cc World Championship.
And it was a three-cylinder Grand Prix machine. It was the bike number 3 that I won my first World Championship on, beat Kenny Roberts. At that time, the Yamahas and Suzukis were 4-cylinders, and so we were starting out with one less cylinder, but it was an amazing bike, engine and machine.
The stage was set for 1985, and an achievement that was nothing less than spectacular, Freddie Spencer's incomparable double victory.
In 1985, when I won the 250cc and 500cc World Championship in the same year, it had never been done before, and nobody believed in us. And I knew then how special it was to be able to try to do it and to win it. So years later, you know, it's been 12 years now and nobody's even tried it. So, you know, it's just great.
Though no one has attempted to match Spencer's feat, Wayne Gardner, Eddie Lawson, and for the last 4 years, Mick Doohan have all won 500 Grand Prix titles for Honda. And in the U.S., Honda has taken one national championship after another, with riders like Mike Baldwin, Fred Merkel, Wayne Rainey, Bubba Schobert, Randy Renfro, Tom Kipp, Arian Racing, and our current #1 600 Supersport rider, Miguel Duhamel. All have won on Hondas. And in the dirt, Honda's domination in the arenas of Supercross and motocross has been just as awesome.
I believe that Honda has done so well in motocross because it set a company policy that said it would. This was a high-profile sport all around the world. It was a tremendous symbolic activity for the company.
The list of Honda riders who have won national championships reads like a who's who of motocross and supercross. Riders like Gary Jones, Marty Smith, Chuck Sun, Johnny O'Mara, Donnie Hansen, David Bailey, Ron Lachine, Mickey Diamond, George Holland, Mike Kidrowski, Rick Johnson, Jeff Stanton, Jean-Michel Bale, Doug Henry, Steve Lamson, and Jeremy McGrath. Then there are the standout performances of Scott Summers, who clinched 8 hare scrambles and Grand National cross-country titles. And of course, Bubba Schobert and Ricky Graham, who both captured Grand National championships.
If you look at Honda and everything that they've done, I don't care if it's trials bikes, motocross, road racing, Formula One, and now IndyCar, they've dominated in every sport that they've gone to within a 3-year period. No other manufacturer can say that they've done that.
To be on a team like Honda was the perfect measuring stick, you know, with guys like Rick Johnson, Johnny O'Mara, myself. I mean, the names of the people that have been involved with Honda. They've had all the best talent.
In fact, Honda has a combined total of more than 100 national and world titles in every class there is. And as much as these victories are due to Honda's great riders, the wins also come from the people behind the bikes.
Honda typically puts its young engineers on race teams for the first few years of their employment. I mean, everything happens fast. It's got to be done right away. It's got to be good or you lose. I think that can translate into positive benefits once you start working on street bikes for sale.
I think Honda as a company has always focused on racing, whether it's on the motorcycle side or the automobile side. Honda is first primarily an engine company, and a lot of their expertise in engines comes from what they've learned in racing.
From the #1 racers in the world to the top dealers in the country, Honda has always given its best when it comes to motorcycles.
Racing spirit is another very important factor for the Honda. Motorcycles lead us and Honda to the world.
Honda was founded on the principles of breakthrough technology, and no era depicts those breakthroughs better than the 70s and 80s.
During 1970 to 80, Honda really made big commitment to this country, United States.
During these years, Honda's landmark bikes came in a mighty stream that shocked the world.
Honda had good marketing, great motorcycles. They kept their nose in the research and the data. They figured out what people wanted and they filled the need, and it was literally an explosion.
1973, the typical Honda engine had been an air-cooled twin or four-cylinder four-stroke, but now the name of an outrageous new two-stroke spread through the off-road community like a wildfire. The Elsinore.
And the sound of it, the look of it, it was all new, sleek, fast, loud, quick. It was a light switch. You gassed it and it went, it didn't wait, which was very different from what was out there previously.
Honda CRs dominated motocross and later supercross in a way no other company can ever hope to match. 1975, the dirt had barely settled when Honda rolled out the biggest motorcycle they had ever produced.
The Goldwing was big and smooth and fast and more comfortable than any of the bikes that had really come before it. The Goldwing was truly the Cadillac, if you will, of motorcycling.
The Goldwing was really the first machine of its size to come with liquid cooling, with an opposed flat four, chassis and suspension components that previously hadn't been used. It began this enormous cult following of people that wanted to use it for long-distance riding.
1979, it was one of the most formidable motorcycles ever built, featuring a three-letter name and a six-cylinder engine, the CBX.
It had performance in the 140-mile-an-hour range and the smoothness. It was incredible. I mean, the motorcycle was a mechanical, superb success right off the bat.
Then Honda did what no other Japanese motorcycle company had ever done. They built a factory in the U.S.
Going back all the way to 1979, with the creation of Honda of America Manufacturing, we built our first motorcycles here in Marysville, Ohio. From that experience, 2-3 years later, 1982, we began producing automobiles also in Marysville, Ohio.
In 1982, Honda also maintained its technological leadership in motorcycles by introducing the world's first mass-produced turbocharged motorcycle, the CX500, a high-performance showcase of Honda's most advanced ideas. In 1983, Honda created an entire new class of bike, the Performance Custom.
The V65 Magna was one of the first 11-second production street bikes on the market. The first commercials for the bike showed it doing smoky burnouts. So it had an enormous impact on the power potential of street bikes.
Then came a radical new sports machine that was as dominant on the track as it was on the street, the 1983 Interceptor.
The VF750F was really the first sport bike as we know them today. The design, development, construction meant that Honda could race the same machine they were selling to the public.
That bike was amazing because they took directly the technology, braking, suspension things, and adapted it to from GP racing to the superbike, and then it kind of was adapted to street. In fact, it stayed one of the greatest street bikes, or the greatest really, for many years because of that.
Looking for new markets, Honda began to invent them. First in 1970, Honda invented an entirely new category, the all-terrain vehicle, with the production of the first ATC 90. And with that head start, Honda never looked back, turning ATVs into a market that rivals motorcycles themselves in size and scope. Honda also reinvented the concept of the scooter, again with tremendous results, selling over 120,000 of them in 1987 alone. In the 70s and 80s, Honda technology exploded at an unbelievable pace. It was one of the most exciting times in the history of motorcycling.
Honda can outdo the rest of the industry when it comes to whatever they want to do. They always seem to have a model that will demonstrate their ability to either design or produce before the rest of the industry does.
I think the same things that have gotten Honda to this point are the same things that will lead it into the next century successfully, which is good marketing, very good engineering, the good use of technology, and building motorcycles that people want to buy.
We are the most strong and we are proud. GM has no motorcycle, Toyota has no motorcycle. So motorcycle is very important for the spirit for the Honda people.